In a capitalistic system, shareholders own the company. They take the entire risk, and therefore the company should be run in the interest of shareholders. One should try to maximize the value for the shareholder. That is what we have been taught, we have been told. And to an extent, I agree, but not entirely. And here's the reason why. Because in a company, shareholders are not the only stakeholders. There are other people involved as well, such as the supplier, the labor force, the banks, the government, the customers of the company, etc. And they have a stake in running the company as well. But the proponent of this theory of value maximization for shareholder, they say that all these other stakeholders, they get something out of the company, even if the company fails. But the shareholder are the one who are left with nothing if the company goes bankrupt. They lose all their capital, and therefore it is only fair to say that because they take all the risk, they should get the best reward. But is it really true that they take all the risk? It may be true hundreds of years ago, when the capitalism was taking roots, when the owner of the company, the supplier of the capital of the company, were the managers of the company as well. At the time, there was no problem of this managerial capitalism, where the managers who were running the company were not the owners. This is a recent phenomenon. Yes, shareholders take the risk, but in today's world, most of the shareholders are the floating shareholders. They own small chunk of the company, very, very small. And if anything goes wrong, then they are the first one to ditch the company. They will just sell their share, take out the money, and go somewhere else. Whereas the other stakeholder, like the employees, they are stuck with the company. Their livelihood depends on the performance of the company. It depends on the long-term viability of the company. And same is true for the suppliers. Many big companies have different suppliers, each of which mostly design its own manufacturing hub in accordance to meet the requirement of its clients. They cannot change their company layout or their factory layout overnight if something goes wrong with their client company. So they are stuck as well, most of the time. And these are two of the prominent stakeholders in a company, the supplier and the supplier of the labor force. They have more to lose than the floating shareholders. So why should a company be run only for the value maximization of the floating shareholders? I think one has to give due weight to the stakes of other stakeholders as well. And these shareholders have not as much at stake as what it used to be hundreds of years ago. In fact, this whole idea of limited liability companies, LLCs, is a few hundreds years old. Before that, in 13th or 14th centuries, in England or in the Western Europe, where this idea of companies came out, there was no limited liability. In fact, any businessman or anyone who was trying to be an entrepreneur was fully liable for his debt. If anything goes wrong with his company or his enterprise, and if he is not able to pay his debt in full, he has to take full responsibility for it, and he can go to jail. He may lose his freedom. There was no concept of liability being limited. But to promote the companies, to promote risk-taking in enterprises which were too big for a small industrialists to promote, the government came up with this idea of limited liability. So they allowed formation of companies in which each shareholder would be liable only to the extent of his share in the company. He won't be persecuted because the company failed. And over time, this limited liability companies, or the joint stock companies, they were not even run by the main shareholder. These companies are run by the professional managers who do not own the money, who do not actually own the company, but they are taking care of the money, of the investment decisions on behalf of the owner of the company, or in other words, on behalf of the shareholders. And most of the shareholders are not looking for the long-term investment. They are looking for dividend, the short-term profit. And the managers are incentivized. If they increase the profit of the company, then their compensation increases. They get share in the company as well. So there's a nexus between the floating shareholders and the professional managers of the company. The shareholder wants highest dividend or maximum profit, which can be returned back to the shareholder in the form of dividend or share buyback. And therefore, these managers try to maximize the profit. And how do they achieve this? They can do it in two ways. Either they increase the revenue or the sales of the company, or they reduce the cost. And most of the time, it is much easier to reduce the cost than increasing the sales, because that is a very difficult task. So to reduce the cost, they can do two or three things. The first thing that they do most of the time is reduce the investment within the company. And the second thing that they do is to renegotiate the wages of the employees. If the employees do not agree, then they will threaten them that if they do not agree, then the company will be shut down, or they would relocate the company to low-cost manufacturing centers such as China or India or anywhere, wherever they can offshore the company. They do the same thing with the suppliers. They try to renegotiate the supply cost on the pretext that if they don't, then the company will be going offshore. In fact, these managers also try to bargain with the government to reduce the tax rate on the pretext or on the threat that they do not reduce the tax rate or they do not give subsidies, and they will relocate to then they would relocate the company to a low tax country. So instead of trying to maximize the production or maximize the revenue and minimize the cost in a fair way, they solely focus on minimizing the cost, cutting the cost, so that the profit can be increased, which can be then given to the shareholders. And this is not good for the company itself, because in the long run, if you don't invest in the company, then there is no future for the company. And if the company does not do well, the other stakeholders do not do well, and this will impact the economy as well. Therefore, this whole idea of shareholder value maximization is imperfect. One should try to maximize the value, but that should not be the sole aim of the managers of the company, to maximize the value. They have to look out for the other aspects of the company as well. They have to see how the values of the other stakeholders, or in fact, they should be trying to maximize the value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. And that's why I think this idea of value maximization for shareholder is one of the dumbest ideas. So that's my take on value maximization. What is yours? As usual, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Thank you.